She hit the floor at his table, limp and barely breathing, and when Zane Sterling caught her fragile weight, his gaze locked onto the raised scar slashed across her throat, evidence of something brutal, something unfinished. In that instant, the city's most dangerous man went completely numb, a stillness more lethal than any rage, and every person in that room knew. Whoever put that mark on her was already a dead man walking. The low, throbbing bass of the club rattled Blair Sutton's teeth as she'd moved through the packed floor carefully just moments before, every step an exercise in sheer willpower, because her chest had ached with dull, persistent pain. It had been 48 hours since the pain medication had worn off, the money long diverted to keep her landlord quiet. What she didn't know was that someone was watching. Table 12 had been her target, the shadowed booth where Zane Sterling sat, a man whose presence radiated lethal, ice-cold control. He'd glanced up, his slate-gray eyes assessing her in half a second. Refills. Blair had managed, her voice quiet. She'd set down the first glass, forcing her hand steady. But as she leaned in to set down the second, the world tilted violently. The heat, the pain, the exhaustion, it all hit at once. The floor rushed up to meet her, but it never reached her. She was caught, her body going limp against the hard chest of the man she was trying to serve. That moment, everything in the room changed. Zane's famed control didn't shatter, it froze. In that moment, holding her fragile, barely there weight, his gaze fell upon the distinct, faded scar high on her throat, and the sight unleashed not rage, but an absolute, terrifying stillness that made the men around him shift uncomfortably. She had collapsed in front of the Mafia Boss, and he had just found a missing piece of his soul. Zane Sterling didn't ask permission. He lifted Blair's limp body from the floor with the same controlled precision he used for everything else, his jaw set in a hard line that made his security team move before he spoke a word. The club's noise faded behind them as he carried her through the private exit, her head lolling against his chest, and he felt the alarming lightness of her like holding something already half gone. He had no idea the night would end in blood. Car, now. His voice cut through the night air, and Marco, his driver, was already pulling the black SUV to the curb. Zane slid into the back seat, adjusting Blair's weight across his lap with an odd gentleness that didn't match the ice in his expression. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the streetlights, and that scar on her throat seemed to glow like an accusation. "Sir?" Marco glanced in the rearview mirror, his voice careful. "The estate. Call Dr. Reeves. Tell him I need him there in 20 minutes. Not 21. Zane's fingers pressed against Blair's wrist, finding her pulse thin and fast, like a trapped bird. He'd held dying men before, felt life slip away under his hands. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy or a soldier. This was a woman who'd been serving him drinks 3 minutes ago, trying to stay invisible, and failing catastrophically. If you've ever felt invisible, been told you take up too much space, or had someone make you feel like you're too much or not enough, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and comment where you're watching from. We're building a family of people who refuse to shrink anymore. The drive took 18 minutes. Zane counted every one of them, his gaze fixed on Blair's face, watching for any sign of consciousness. She didn't stir. When they arrived, he carried her straight through the marble foyer and up the curved staircase to the guest wing, bypassing his own rooms. The east bedroom had already been prepared. His head of security, Torres, was efficient like that and Doctor. Reeves was waiting beside the bed, medical bag open. "Put her down gently," Reeves said, already reaching for his stethoscope. "What happened?" She collapsed. Zane laid her on the bed, stepping back only when Torres physically touched his arm. Exhaustion, maybe malnutrition. I don't know. Fix it. But what he discovered next changed everything. Reeves worked in silence, checking vitals, examining her pupils with a penlight. Zane watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, that strange numbness from the club settling deeper into his chest. He'd built an empire on reading people, on knowing their weaknesses and exploiting them, but he hadn't seen this coming. Blair Sutton had been invisible to him until the moment she fell. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished," Reeves said finally, starting an IV line. "Her blood pressure's dangerously low. I'll need to run more tests, but she needs rest and proper nutrition." "When did she last eat?" "I don't know. The admission felt like failure. Find out." Torres appeared at his elbow. "Sir, her belongings from the club." He held out a small black purse, the kind waitresses kept their tips in. Zane took it, feeling the lightness again, barely any weight at all. There was one detail everyone missed. Inside, he found $37 in crumpled bills, a state ID showing an address in the Docks district, and a prescription bottle. Zane read the label twice. Tramadol, 50 milligrams. Take as needed for pain. Patient, Blair Sutton. The date was 3 weeks old. The bottle was empty. She was working in pain, he said quietly, more to himself than Torres. And she ran out. Torres moved closer, his voice dropping. Want me to check her employment records at the club? Check everything. Zane pocketed the prescription bottle and ID, his mind already working through the implications. A woman in her mid-20s, working a dive club despite obvious medical need, living in the worst part of the city, running from something or running towards something? Both, maybe. Her apartment, her finances, her medical history. I want to know why she needed this medication, and why she couldn't afford to refill it. Consider it done. He knew something that no one else in the building did. Zane returned to the bedside as Reeves finished connecting the IV. Blair looked even smaller against the cream-colored pillows, her dark hair spread around her face, and that scar he couldn't stop looking at it. The skin was raised, keloid tissue that spoke of inadequate medical care during healing. It curved along her throat, maybe 4 inches long, positioned precisely where someone could have held a knife or applied pressure. A threat scar. A reminder scar. Will she be all right? Zane asked. Reeves nodded. She should wake up in a few hours. Her body just shut down from stress and deprivation. But Mr. Sterling, this didn't happen overnight. She's been running on empty for a long time. After Reeves left, Zane pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, elbows on his knees. He should leave. He had business to handle, calls to make, an empire that didn't run itself. But he stayed, watching Blair's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, and that numb feeling spread until it felt like ice in his veins. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. He'd seen suffering before. Hell, he'd caused most of it. But something about holding her fragile weight, about seeing that scar and the evidence of her silent desperation, had cracked something open inside him that he couldn't close. She'd been invisible, and now she was all he could see. An hour later, Torres returned with a tablet. Initial report on Blair Sutton. Zane took it, scrolling through the information. Employment history, 3 clubs in 2 years, all bottom-tier establishments. Financial records. Checking account with $146.82. No savings. Rent 2 months overdue. Medical history. Emergency room visit 8 months ago for chest pain. Prescribed tramadol. No follow-up care documented. And then, buried in her employment application from the club, emergency contact listed as none. References, none. Previous address, transitional. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. There's more, Torres said carefully. Her previous address was a women's shelter in Riverside. She stayed there for 6 weeks before moving to her current apartment. The intake form mentions she was fleeing domestic situation, but no police report was filed. Zane's jaw tightened. Names? The shelter's confidential records are sealed. I'm working on it. Work faster. Zane set the tablet down and looked at Blair again, at the scar on her throat that suddenly made terrible sense. Someone had hurt her badly enough to send her into hiding, badly enough that she was still running. And Torres? I want to know everyone she's been in contact with in the last year. Every phone call, every text, every person who looked at her twice. Understood? Understood, sir. After Torres left, Zane reached out and adjusted the blanket over Blair's shoulders. His hands, which had broken bones and ended lives, were surprisingly gentle. The numbness was still there, that strange, cold stillness that felt more dangerous than any rage he'd ever experienced. Because rage burned hot and fast, and then it was over. But this was different. This was the kind of cold that didn't thaw, the kind that made decisions permanent. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. Blair Sutton had collapsed in front of him, and in that moment, when he'd caught her falling body and seen the evidence of her desperate, hidden struggle, something fundamental had shifted in Zane Sterling's carefully controlled world. He didn't know what to call it yet. Obsession, maybe. Possession. Responsibility. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever had put that scar on her throat was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Blair woke to softness. That was her first thought. Everything was too soft, too clean, too quiet. The sheets beneath her were high thread count, the kind she'd only ever touched while making beds in the luxury suites above the club. Panic hit immediately. She jerked upright, wincing as an IV line pulled at her arm, and her vision swam with the sudden movement. Easy, A woman's voice, calm and professional. Blair's gaze snapped to the figure sitting beside the bed, a doctor, older, with kind eyes and a stethoscope around her neck. "You're safe. You fainted at the club. Mister, Sterling brought you here." But the real question was, who planned it? "Where's here?" Blair's voice came out rough, and she was already reaching for the IV, ready to rip it out if necessary. "I need to leave. You need to stay still before you pass out again." The doctor, her name tag read, Dr. Chen, pressed a gentle hand to Blair's shoulder. "Your body was in severe distress, dehydration, malnutrition, and from what I can see, untreated chronic pain. How long since you've seen a doctor?" "I don't." Blair swallowed hard, her mind racing. She remembered the club, remembered Zane Sterling's table, remembered the world tilting. Everything after that was blank. "I can't be here. I can't afford." "That's already handled." And then, the gun clicked. The door opened, and Blair's breath caught. Zane Sterling walked in like he owned the space, which, she realized with sinking dread, he probably did. He was dressed differently than at the club, the suit jacket gone, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. But his eyes were the same, slate gray, assessing, missing nothing. "Dr. Chen, give us a moment," Zane said. It wasn't a question. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Blair. "She needs rest." "I'm aware." Zane's gaze never left Blair's face. 5 minutes. Dr. Chen left, and silence filled the room like water rising. Blair forced herself to meet Zane's stare, even as every instinct screamed at her to look away, to make herself small. She'd survived the last 8 months by being invisible. And now she was trapped in a bedroom with the most dangerous man in the city, wearing nothing but a hospital gown, with an IV in her arm. "You have questions," Zane said, moving to stand at the foot of the bed. Not close enough to trap her, but close enough that she felt the weight of his presence. "Ask them." "Why am I here?" Blair's hands fisted in the sheets. "You should have called an ambulance, taken me to a hospital. You collapsed in my club, serving my table. That makes you my responsibility." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Hospitals ask questions. They file reports. You don't strike me as someone who wants official documentation of your current situation." Blair's stomach dropped. "What do you know about my situation?" Something didn't add up, and the truth was darker than he expected. "Not enough." Zane pulled out her prescription bottle from his pocket, holding it up. "But I'm about to know everything. This is tramadol. You're taking it for pain, which means there's an underlying condition you're not treating. Your apartment's in the docks, rent's overdue, and you're working yourself into the ground at a club that pays minimum wage plus tips. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here until you're medically cleared. Dr. Chen will run whatever tests she needs. And then you're going to tell me exactly what you're running from." "I'm not running from anything." The lie tasted bitter. "And I don't need your charity. I'll work off whatever this costs." "Torres." A man appeared in the doorway so quickly that Blair startled. He was built like a wall, with a comm device in his ear and the unmistakable bearing of private security. Zane didn't even look at him. From here on, the rules of the game changed. "Find every detail of her life," Zane said, his voice dropping into something cold and absolute. "Employment history, financial records, medical files, associates, family. I want to know where she's been, who she's talked to, and why she's scared. And Torres? Prioritize anyone named Victor." Blair felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you—" Zane's gaze locked onto hers, and she saw it then, the same terrifying stillness from the club, that moment when he'd held her and gone completely numb. "You said his name," Zane said quietly. "When you were unconscious, you said, 'Victor can't find me, so now I need to know exactly who Victor is and what he did to put that scar on your throat.'" Blair's hand flew to her neck, covering the raised tissue instinctively. Shame burned through her, hot and acidic. "You had no right. I had every right the moment you fell into my arms." Zane leaned forward slightly, and the movement made her flinch. He noticed, and something flickered across his face. Not quite anger, but close. "I don't know what happened to you, but I know terror when I see it, and I know that scar wasn't accidental, so you can tell me willingly, or Torres can find out the hard way. Your choice." "This isn't a choice," Blair shot back, her voice shaking. "This is a cage. You're just wrapping it in expensive sheets." Someone in the room was lying, but who? For a long moment, Zane said nothing. Then he straightened, his expression cooling back into that mask of control. "Torres, get started. And find out where she worked before the club. I want names of everyone who had access to her. Sir. Torres disappeared. Zane moved toward the door, then paused. Dr. Chen will be back to finish your examination. You'll eat, rest, and cooperate. In 48 hours, when you're strong enough to have this conversation properly, we'll talk about Victor and what happens next. Until then, understand something. You're not leaving this estate. Not because I'm holding you prisoner, but because whatever you're running from is still out there. And I don't return broken things to the people who broke them. I'm not a thing, Blair whispered. His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. No. Zane's gray eyes met hers one last time. You're not. You're the woman who collapsed in front of me, and I saw exactly what that cost you. That makes you mine to protect now, whether you want it or not. He left, the door closing with a soft click. Blair sat frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought the IV might register it. Torres was already investigating. Zane knew about Victor, and she was trapped in a house she couldn't escape, under the control of a man whose protection felt more dangerous than anything she'd run from. She touched the scar on her throat again, remembering Victor's hands, his voice, the way he'd whispered that she'd never be free, and now, somehow, she'd traded one prison for another. Except this time, the man holding the keys had seen her at her weakest and hadn't looked away. He'd gone numb, terrifyingly, completely numb. And Blair didn't know if that was better or worse than rage. Torres delivered the full report 60 hours later. Zane read it in his study, the leather chair creaking as he leaned back, and with each page, the numbness in his chest crystallized into something sharper. The file was thorough, Torres never did anything halfway, and it painted a picture of systematic destruction disguised as love. Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Blair Sutton, age 26. Born in a small town outside the city, raised by a single mother who died when Blair was 19. No siblings, no extended family. She'd moved to the city for college, studied literature, and met Victor Hale in her junior year. He was 32 then, a consultant with vague business interests and a criminal record Torres had to dig through 3 layers of sealed files to find: assault, harassment, violation of restraining orders. All charges dropped or pleaded down. The relationship had lasted 2 years. The medical records told the story Blair probably never would. Fractured wrist, treated and released. Bruised ribs, treated and released. And then, 8 months ago, the incident that ended it. Lacerations to the throat, defensive wounds on her hands, severe psychological trauma. The attending ER physician had noted suspected domestic violence and offered resources. Blair had refused and disappeared into the shelter system the next day. Victor Hale had been searching for her ever since. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Zane set down the file and reached for his phone. Torres, conference room, now. 10 minutes later, his core team assembled. Torres, head of security, Marco, his driver and enforcer, and Luca, his consigliere, the man who handled problems that required finesse rather than force. They stood around the table as Zane laid out the file, page by page. Victor Hale, Zane said, tapping the police photo clipped to the first page. Mid-30s, works as a security consultant for businesses that need things done quietly, which means he's a thug with a business card. He's been stalking Blair Sutton for 8 months. I want him found, I want his finances frozen, and I want every person he's talked to in the last year questioned. Quietly. Define quietly, Luca said, his voice mild. No bodies, yet. Zane met his gaze. But I want him to know someone's watching. I want his accounts locked, his contacts warned, his reputation shredded. Make him understand that coming near her again would be the last decision he ever makes. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. Torres nodded. Already started. Hale's been using a PI to track her movements. The PI filed reports to 3 addresses Hale's been rotating between. I've got surveillance on all of them. Good. Shut the PI down, pay him double to disappear and forget Blair's name. Zane turned to Marco. The club where she worked, who's the manager? Guy named Petty? Dean Petty. Real piece of work. Marco's jaw tightened. Runs the place like a sweatshop. Girls work 10-hour shifts, no breaks, and he takes a cut of their tips for administrative fees. Blair's file shows he's been docking her pay for being too slow and threatening to fire her if she didn't pick up extra shifts. Zane felt that cold stillness deepen, threatening her. Yeah, Torres pulled the security footage from last week. Petty cornered her in the stockroom, got in her face. She didn't fight back, just took it, like she was used to it. The image formed too easily in Zane's mind. Blair, already exhausted and in pain, being intimidated by a small-time tyrant who thought he could push her because she had nowhere else to go. The kind of man who preyed on women with no options. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. "Marco, visit Mr. Petty tonight," Zane said quietly. "Explain that Blair Sutton's employment is terminated, with 4 weeks severance paid in cash. Explain that if he ever contacts her again, for any reason, his club will burn to the ground with him inside it. Are we clear?" "Crystal." Marco's smile was wolfish. Luca cleared his throat. "And Blair's financial situation? Her rent's overdue. She's got medical debt, and her bank account's nearly empty." Zane pulled out another page, a detailed breakdown Torres had compiled. "I want the rent paid through the end of the year, the medical debt cleared, and I want a financial advisor to contact her landlord and negotiate a lease termination without penalty, effective immediately." "She's not going back to that apartment," Torres said. "It wasn't a question." "No." Zane's voice was flat. "She's not going anywhere near the docks again. That building's a security nightmare. And if Victor's PI tracked her there, Victor has too. She stays at the estate until this is resolved." "And if she objects?" Luca asked carefully. "She will object. She'll fight me every step of the way because she thinks accepting help makes her weak." Zane closed the file. "But I don't care about her pride right now. I care about keeping her alive." In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. The room fell silent. Luca and Torres exchanged a look Zane couldn't quite read, but he ignored it. They could think whatever they wanted about his motivations. He wasn't entirely sure he understood them himself. All he knew was that holding Blair's barely there weight while she lay unconscious in his arms had flipped some switch inside him that he couldn't flip back. "One more thing," Zane said. "Blair mentioned Victor can't find her, which means he's been actively looking, not just waiting for her to resurface. Torres, I want to know how close he's gotten. Check her phone records, her social media, anything that might have leaked her location." Torres grimaced. "Already did. She doesn't have social media. Her phone's a prepaid burner. Only 3 contacts: the club, her landlord, and a women's crisis hotline she called twice last month. But here's the problem, Petty. The club manager? He's got a cousin who works in records at the shelter where Blair stayed. The cousin pulled her file 3 weeks ago." Zane's hands curled into fists. "So Victor knows she's in the city. More than that. The PI's report from 2 weeks ago puts him within 6 blocks of her apartment. He's been circling, getting closer. My guess? He would have found her within a month." He realized he wasn't alone, someone else had arrived. The cold in Zane's chest turned to ice. If Blair hadn't collapsed, if she'd kept working herself into the ground at that club, Victor would have cornered her. And given the scar on her throat and the fear Zane had seen in her eyes, he knew exactly how that confrontation would have ended. "Change of plans?" Zane said. "I want Victor's movements restricted. If he leaves the city, follow him. If he contacts the PI or anyone associated with Blair, I want to know immediately. And Luca, reach out to your contacts in the legal system. I want a restraining order filed against Victor Hale, effective tomorrow. Blair doesn't need to be involved. I'll swear out the affidavit as a witness to her distress." Luca raised an eyebrow. "That's creative. That's necessary." Zane stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Victor Hale gets close enough to smell her perfume, and he won't live long enough to regret it. Make sure he understands that." After they left, Zane returned to his desk and opened the file again, flipping to the photo of Blair from her college ID. She was smiling in the picture, her eyes bright, no scar on her throat. She looked young and hopeful, like someone who believed the world was fundamentally good. Victor had taken that from her, and then he'd hunted her, trapped her, nearly broken her. He didn't want revenge, he needed it. Zane traced the edge of the photo, that numb feeling settling deeper. He'd built his empire on calculated violence, on knowing when to strike and when to wait. But this wasn't about empire building. This was about a woman who'd tried to serve him a drink and collapsed because she'd been running on empty for so long that her body simply gave up. She was upstairs now, sleeping in the East Wing, under Dr. Chen's care. She didn't know yet that her rent was paid, that her debts were cleared, that the man who'd been hunting her was being systematically dismantled. She didn't know that Zane Sterling had decided she was his to protect, and that once he made a decision, it was absolute. But she'd find out soon enough. And then they'd see if her defiance was stronger than his control. He was betting it wasn't. But part of him, the part that had gone numb, holding her fragile weight, hoped she'd fight him anyway. Because a woman who could survive Victor Hale deserved to fight for her own life. Even if Zane had already decided to win the war on her behalf. Blair was stronger after 4 days. Dr. Chen had cleared her medically, no underlying conditions, just severe neglect and stress, and the IV was finally gone. She'd eaten real meals, slept in a bed that didn't smell like mildew, and her body had responded with alarming speed. It made her furious. She found Zane in his study on the 5th morning, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt she'd found in the guest room closet. Someone had brought her clothes, expensive, well-fitted clothes that definitely hadn't come from her apartment. Another liberty taken without asking. "I'm leaving," she announced from the doorway. Zane looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "No, you're not." He thought it was over until he noticed something strange. "You can't keep me here." Blair stepped into the room, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "I'm not one of your, whatever it is you collect. I'm grateful for the medical care, and I'll pay you back, but I have a life to get back to." "What life?" Zane's voice was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "The apartment you can't afford? The job that was killing you? Or maybe you mean the life where Victor Hale is 6 blocks away from finding you?" Blair froze. "How do you know that name?" "I know everything." Zane stood, moving around the desk with that same controlled grace. "I know he broke your wrist in October 2 years ago. I know he cracked your ribs that Christmas. I know he held a knife to your throat 8 months ago and told you he'd kill you if you ever left. And I know he's been hunting you ever since, getting closer every day. And you've been trying to survive on willpower and $37 while working for a man who makes Hale look like a saint." Shame and rage warred in Blair's chest, hot and choking. "You had no right to dig into my life." He trusted her, and that was his biggest mistake. "I had every right." Zane stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You collapsed in front of me. You said his name while unconscious. That gave me all the permission I needed." "That's not how permission works," Blair's voice cracked. "You don't get to decide what's best for me just because you saw me at my weakest. I've been handling this on my own for 8 months, and I was fine. You were dying." The words cut like glass. "Slowly maybe, but dying all the same. Another month, and your body would have given out completely. You think I didn't see that? You think I don't recognize someone who's been run into the ground by fear?" Blair's breath hitched. "I'm not your responsibility. You became my responsibility the moment I caught you." Zane's jaw tightened. "And I don't abandon responsibilities. So here's what's going to happen. Your rent is paid through the end of the year. Your medical debt is cleared. Dean Petty has been strongly encouraged to never contact you again. And Victor Hale is currently under surveillance, with a restraining order being filed as we speak. If people like Dean Petty and Victor Hale, who tear others down for existing, make your blood boil like they do mine, hit that subscribe button and join us. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's stand together against everyone who's ever made someone feel worthless." The room tilted. "You, what?" "I fixed your immediate problems," Zane said flatly. "The ones that were killing you while you pretended everything was fine." "I didn't ask you to fix anything." Blair's hands shook. "I didn't ask you to pay my rent or threaten my boss or God. You can't just swoop in and rearrange my life because you feel guilty about." For the first time, he wasn't in control. "This isn't guilt." Zane's voice dropped, that terrifying stillness creeping back into his expression. "This is me looking at a woman with a scar on her throat and knowing, with absolute certainty, that the man who put it there will try again. And I don't allow threats to continue breathing in my city. Especially not threats to people I've decided to protect. I don't want your protection." The words tore out of her. "I want my dignity. I want to make my own choices, even if they're bad ones. I want to be more than some broken thing you picked up and decided to fix like a project." Something flickered across Zane's face. "You think that's what this is? What else could it be?" Blair's laugh was bitter. "You're the Mafia Boss. I'm a waitress who fainted at your table. This isn't some romance novel where the powerful man falls for the damsel in distress. This is you exercising control because that's what you do. You control things." "You're right." Zane's admission caught her off guard. "I do control things. I control empires, politicians, entire criminal networks. But you? You I can't control. You won't let me. And that's the only reason you're still standing here arguing instead of locked in the East Wing until I decide Victor's no longer a threat." Blair stared at him. "That's insane. That's reality." Zane moved closer, and Blair forced herself not to step back. "So here's your ultimatum, since you want choices so badly. Option 1, stay here, under my protection, until Victor is permanently dealt with. You'll have your own space, your own freedom within the estate, And you'll never have to see me if you don't want to, but you'll be safe. And option 2? And suddenly, he realized he was being played. I give you $50,000, a new identity, and transportation to any city in the country. You disappear, start over, and hope Victor never finds you, which he will, eventually, because men like him always do. And when he does, I won't be there to stop him. Blair's throat tightened. That's not a choice. That's a threat. That's reality, Zane repeated. Victor's escalating. Torres found evidence he's been buying weapons, asking questions about you to people who shouldn't know your name. He's not going to stop, Blair. Not until he has you back or you're dead. Those are his options. Mine are to either protect you or let you walk away. But I need you to understand, if you walk away and something happens to you, I won't forgive myself. And I won't forgive you for making me live with that. The raw honesty in his voice stunned her. Blair searched his face, looking for manipulation, for the calculated coldness she'd expected. But all she saw was that same numb stillness, like he was holding something massive and terrible at bay through sheer force of will. Why do you care? She whispered. You don't even know me. This choice would define the rest of his life. I know you ran from a man who tried to kill you. I know you've been surviving on scraps and still showed up for work every night. I know you have a scar on your throat and you still tried to set down that second glass before you collapsed because you didn't want to cause a scene. Zane's gaze held hers. I know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met, and I know that strength is about to get you killed. So yes, I care. Whether you want me to or not. Blair felt tears burning behind her eyes and hated herself for it. I can't stay here and be your charity case. Then don't. Zane stepped back, giving her space. Stay here and argue with me every day. Fight me on every decision. Make my life hell if it makes you feel better. But stay alive. That's all I'm asking. That's not all you're asking. Blair's voice was steady now, even as her heart raced. You're asking me to trust you, to believe that you're not just another man trying to control me. I am trying to control you, Zane said bluntly. I'm trying to control whether you live or die. Everything else? That's negotiable. You want to pay me back? Fine. You want to work? We'll find something. You want to keep your independence? I'll give you every inch of it I can while still keeping you breathing. But the one thing I won't negotiate on is Victor. He doesn't get to touch you, ever again. Blair closed her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her. Not physical this time, but emotional. She'd been fighting for so long, running for so long, that the idea of someone else carrying even part of that weight felt both terrifying and unbearably tempting. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. If I stay, she said finally. I'm not your prisoner. I'm not your project. And I'm not your... whatever you think I am. Agreed. And I will pay you back, every cent. I don't care if it takes years. Agreed. And you don't get to make decisions about my life without asking me first. Zane hesitated, and Blair saw the struggle in his eyes, the boss who controlled everything warring with the man who'd just promised her autonomy. I'll try, he said, but if it's a choice between asking permission and keeping you alive, I'm choosing your life, every time. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest, and somehow that mattered more than empty promises. Okay, Blair whispered. I'll stay, until Victor's gone. But then we renegotiate everything. Deal. Zane extended his hand, and after a moment, Blair took it. His palm was warm, his grip firm, and she felt that same electric shock from the club the moment when he'd caught her and everything had shifted. She was choosing to stay in the orbit of a dangerous man because he'd seen her at her worst and hadn't looked away, because he'd gone numb instead of angry. And that stillness promised a protection she'd never had before. Blair just hoped she wasn't trading one nightmare for another. 3 days after their confrontation, Zane knocked on Blair's door with a proposition. She'd been reading in the window seat one of the many books from the estate's library that she'd been devouring to avoid thinking about her situation, and looked up warily when he entered. I have a job for you, he said without preamble. If you're interested. Blair set down her book. What kind of job? But this wasn't even the most shocking part. The legitimate kind. Zane leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. My business operations have a public face. Investments, real estate, consulting. I need someone to manage my calendar, handle correspondence, and attend meetings as my associate. It's not charity. It's a position I've needed filled for months. And you're qualified. I studied literature, not business management. You also survived 8 months on the run while holding down a job and staying one step ahead of a stalker. That takes organizational skills most MBAs don't have. Zane's expression was unreadable. The pay is 6 figures. You'll have your own office, your own responsibilities, and you'll work directly with me, which means you'll see exactly how I operate. No illusions, no sanitized version. You'll know exactly who you're working for. Blair studied him, trying to find the catch. Why? Because I meant what I said about not treating you like charity. You want independence? Earn it. You want to understand my world? See it firsthand. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because keeping you here without purpose would drive you insane. And me along with you. Despite herself, Blair almost smiled. You're that sure I'd be difficult? I'm counting on it. Zane pushed off the doorframe. Think about it. You can start Monday if you want. Or tell me to go to hell. Your choice. He left before she could respond, and Blair sat in the ensuing silence, her mind racing. It was a calculated move, she saw that clearly. Zane was giving her structure, purpose, proximity. He was making himself indispensable while giving her the illusion of control, but it was also an opportunity. To learn, to build skills, to have leverage in a situation where she currently had none. On Monday, she took the job. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. The first week was an adjustment. Zane's legitimate businesses were exactly that: investment portfolios, property management, consultation contracts with corporations that needed discreet security services. Blair handled schedules, vetted emails, prepared briefing documents. It was tedious work, but she was good at it, and she could feel herself settling into the rhythm. The proximity was harder to manage. Zane's office was adjacent to hers, separated by a glass door that gave him a clear sightline to her desk. He was there by 7 every morning, working until midnight most nights, and Blair found herself matching his hours without meaning to. They fell into a pattern: coffee at 7, morning briefing at 8, separate work until lunch, afternoon meetings, evening review. And in between, conversations. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. You're reading Dostoevsky, Zane observed one afternoon, noting the book on her desk during a briefing. Crime and Punishment, Blair confirmed. I'm teaching myself Russian literature. Seemed appropriate, given present company. His lips twitched. Comparing me to Raskolnikov? More like Porfiry. You both have that way of seeing straight through people. And you're Sonia? The moral compass in a world without morality? I'm the woman trying to figure out if redemption is possible, or if we're all just pretending. Blair held his gaze. What do you think? Zane was quiet for a moment. I think redemption is for people who regret their actions. I don't. Even the worst ones? Especially those. He leaned back in his chair. The worst things I've done were necessary, and I'd do them again. It should have frightened her. Instead, Blair found it refreshing, the brutal honesty, the lack of excuses. Victor had always justified his violence with love, with passion, with her supposed failures. Zane simply owned his choices and moved forward. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. Torres updated me on Victor, Zane said, shifting topics. The restraining order is in place. He's been warned what happens if he violates it. Blair's chest tightened. Has he tried to contact me? 3 times. Emails to your old address, messages left at the club, and 1 call to the women's shelter. Zane's voice was carefully neutral. All intercepted. He doesn't know where you are. Yet. He won't find you. Zane's certainty should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her acutely aware of how dependent she'd become on his protection. Blair, I need you to trust that I'm handling this. I do trust that you're handling it, she said quietly. I just don't know what handling it means in your world, and I'm afraid to ask. Then don't ask. Zane stood, moving to the window. Some things are easier if you don't know the details. That's not how trust works. He turned to look at her, and something in his expression shifted vulnerability. Maybe, or as close to it as a man like Zane Sterling could get. I'm trying to protect you from the ugliness of what I do. Don't make me ruin that by explaining it. Blair stood as well, closing the distance between them. I've seen ugliness. I've lived it. You're not protecting me by keeping me in the dark. You're just deciding what I can handle. And I'm tired of men deciding that for me. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged with something Blair didn't want to name. Attraction, yes, but also recognition. 2 people who'd survived their own hells and found themselves in an improbable alliance. What followed next was completely unexpected. What do you want to know? Zane asked finally. Everything. How you built this empire. Who you've hurt. What you'd do to Victor if you got the chance. Blair's voice was steady. I want to know exactly who I'm choosing to trust. That could take a while. We have time. And so they talked. Late into the night, over takeout in his office, Zane told her about his rise, the calculated violence, the strategic alliances, the men he'd killed and the ones he'd spared. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to make himself sympathetic. He simply laid out the truth of who he was, a man who'd clawed his way to power and would do anything to keep it. Blair listened, asked questions, and didn't look away. And when he finished, when he'd shown her the darkest parts of himself, she said, "Thank you for being honest." "You're not horrified?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But not of you. Of how much sense you make. Of how I can listen to you describe terrible things and understand why you did them. That scares me more than anything else." For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. Zane moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her jaw. "I scare you? You make me feel safe," Blair whispered. "And that's the most terrifying thing of all." He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. Blair didn't. She leaned in, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with 8 months of loneliness and fear and desperate, aching need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates things," he murmured. "Everything about this is already complicated." Blair's laugh was shaky. "What's one more complication? You're not just a job anymore. I was never just a job." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "And you know it." Zane's smile was small but genuine. "No, you weren't." That night marked a shift. They were still boss and employee, still protector and protected, but they were also something else, something neither of them could quite define but both recognized as inevitable. Blair was falling for the man who'd caught her when she collapsed, and Zane Sterling, who controlled empires and never let anyone close, was falling right back. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Blair's life. By day, she was Zane's associate professional, competent, learning the intricate machinery of his legitimate businesses. By night, she was something else entirely. The woman who sat across from him at dinner, debating philosophy and morality while he poured wine, and listened with that intense focus he gave everything. They didn't sleep together. Not yet. The kiss in his office had opened a door, but neither of them rushed through it. Instead, they circled each other, learning and testing and building something that felt more real than anything Blair had experienced before. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. "Tell me about your mother," Zane said one evening. They were in his private living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, and Blair was curled in an armchair with tea. She tensed. "Why?" "Because you never mention family, and I want to know where you came from." Blair was quiet for a long moment. "She died when I was 19. Lung cancer. She smoked 2 packs a day and refused to see a doctor until it was too late. The old grief was still there, but duller now, worn smooth by time. She was stubborn and proud, and she taught me that asking for help was weakness, which is probably why I ended up with Victor." "She was wrong," Zane said simply. "Asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival," says the man who controls everything. "I control things because I learned early that no one else would." Zane leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My father died when I was 14. Heart attack. My mother remarried within 6 months, a man who saw me as competition for her attention and my father's money. So I left, built my own life. And yeah, I'm controlling, because the alternative is chaos." Blair hadn't known that. She studied his face, seeing the shadows there, the weight of decades of self-reliance. "We're both orphans then. We're both survivors." He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "Which is why this works. We don't need saving, we just need someone who understands." What she found in the envelope froze her in place. "Is that what you think this is?" Blair's voice was soft. "Understanding?" "Among other things." Zane's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm not good at this, Blair. At letting people in. But you're different. You don't flinch from who I am. You argue with me, challenge me, call me on my bullshit. And somehow that makes me want to be better. Not a better person necessarily, but better for you." Blair felt her throat tighten. "I'm not some moral redemption project. No, you're the woman who survived Victor Hale and still believes in dignity and choice. You're stronger than I'll ever be." He squeezed her hand. "And I'm selfish enough to want that strength in my life. What if I'm not as strong as you think? Then we'll figure it out together." The simplicity of it, the absolute certainty in his voice made something crack open in Blair's chest. She'd been so afraid of being seen as weak, of being defined by what Victor had done to her. But Zane saw her trauma and still saw strength. He saw her collapse and called it survival. "I have nightmares," she admitted. "About Victor. About the knife. Sometimes I wake up and I can feel it at my throat again, and I can't breathe." "I know." Zane's voice was gentle. "I've heard you. The walls are thick, but not that thick. Dr. Chen offered to prescribe something to help you sleep, but you refused. I don't want to be dependent on medication again." "Then let me help differently." He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Come with me." He led her through the house to a room she'd never seen, a training facility with mats on the floor, weights along one wall, and various equipment she didn't recognize. "This is where I work out aggression," Zane explained. "Where I turn fear and anger into something useful. I want to teach you to do the same." But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. "You want to teach me to fight? I want to teach you to not feel helpless." He moved to the center of the mat. "Victor had power over you because you didn't know how to fight back. I can't undo that. But I can give you skills so that if anyone ever tries to hurt you again, you'll know exactly how to make them regret it." Blair stared at him, something fierce and grateful rising in her chest. "When do we start?" "Now." They trained 3 times a week after that. Zane was a patient teacher, showing her basic self-defense moves, teaching her where to hit to cause maximum damage, how to use an attacker's momentum against them. Blair was clumsy at first, her body still remembering the exhaustion and pain. But slowly, week by week, she got stronger. And as her body healed, so did something else. The nightmares became less frequent. The scar on her throat felt less like a brand and more like a reminder. She'd survived. She was surviving still. One night, after a particularly intense training session, Zane pinned her on the mat, not roughly, but firmly, demonstrating how to escape from a hold. Blair's breath caught as she looked up at him, both of them sweating and breathing hard, and the tension between them finally snapped. "You're thinking very loudly," Zane murmured. "I'm thinking I want you to kiss me again." "That's a bad idea." But he didn't move. "Why?" "Because once I start, I'm not going to want to stop." His eyes searched hers. "And you deserve someone who can give you normal. Someone who doesn't have blood on his hands and enemies at his door. You deserve better than this." "I don't want better." Blair reached up, her fingers tracing his jaw. "I want you. The man who caught me when I fell. The man who saw my worst and didn't flinch. I want the terrifying stillness and the brutal honesty and the way you look at me like I'm the only thing in the room that matters." "You are," Zane said roughly. "You're the only thing that's mattered in a very long time." This time when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the things neither of them could say. Blair kissed him back just as hard, her hands tangling in his hair, and when he pulled her closer, she went willingly. They made it to his bedroom somehow, shedding clothes and barriers, and all the careful distance they'd maintained. And when Zane finally touched her, really touched her, skin to skin, with a reverence that made her feel precious instead of broken, Blair felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was healing. This was choosing. This was taking back power from the man who'd tried to destroy her by giving herself to someone who saw her as whole. Afterward, lying tangled in Zane's sheets, Blair traced the tattoos on his chest. "Tell me about these." "Each one represents a choice I made," he said quietly. "A line I crossed. A person I lost. They're reminders that my life is built on violence." "Does that bother you?" "No." "Does it bother you?" Blair considered. "It should, but I think violence in defense of something is different than violence for control. You use your power to protect. Victor used his to destroy. That distinction matters. You're trying to make me into something I'm not." "No." She met his gaze. "I'm seeing you clearly for exactly what you are, and I'm choosing you anyway." Zane pulled her closer, his arms secure around her. "I don't deserve this." "Neither do I, but maybe that's the point." Blair rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Maybe we both deserve a second chance, even if it looks nothing like what we expected." They fell asleep like that. 2 people who'd survived their own private wars finding something like peace in each other's arms. And for the first time in 8 months, Blair slept through the night without nightmares, because the man holding her had promised to destroy anyone who tried to hurt her. And she believed him. The call came at 3 in the morning. Blair woke to Zane's phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand, his body going rigid beside her. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert despite the hour. "Talk to me." Blair couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Zane's face transform, the warmth draining away, replaced by that cold, terrifying stillness she recognized from the night at the club. His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. Location? A pause. Good. Keep him contained. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and turned to Blair, his expression unreadable. I need to go handle something. Stay in the house. Torres will be right outside. What happened? Nothing you need to worry about. He was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with efficient speed. Blair sat up, wrapping the sheet around herself. Zane, what happened? He stopped, his back to her. Victor tried to get to you. His PI found someone who works here, a delivery driver. Offered him $20,000 to provide information about your location and routine. Blair's blood went cold. Did he? The driver came to us immediately. He's been feeding Victor false information for 3 days under Torres's supervision. Tonight, Victor took the bait. He's at a warehouse on the east side, waiting for the driver to bring him proof of your location. Zane turned to face her, and his eyes were chips of ice. I'm going to make sure he understands that was a fatal mistake. What are you going to do? Are you Team Blair and Zane? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. What I should have done 8 months ago when I first read your file. He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. Blair, I need you to not ask me the details. Can you do that? She wanted to say yes, wanted to let him handle this and preserve her ability to pretend she didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but that would be cowardice. And she'd promised herself she was done with cowardice. No, she said quietly. I can't. If you're doing this because of me, then I need to know what it costs. Zane's jaw tightened. It costs nothing. Victor Hale is a dead man walking. He was the moment he put that scar on your throat. Tonight just moves up the timetable. Zane, he's been stalking you for 8 months. He hired a PI to find you. He tried to bribe one of my people. And if I let him walk away tonight, he'll try again. And eventually, he'll succeed. Zane's voice was utterly calm, which was somehow more chilling than anger. So I'm going to eliminate the threat, permanently. And you're going to let me, because you know I'm right. Blair felt nauseous. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about protection. He released her face, stepping back. I told you who I am. I told you what I do. This is what that looks like in practice. And I won't apologize for it. I'm not asking you to apologize. Blair's hands twisted in the sheet. I'm asking if there's another way. Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. There isn't. Victor's escalating. The restraining order means nothing to him. Prison wouldn't hold him. Men like him have connections, ways to reach people even from inside. The only solution is permanent removal. Zane's expression softened slightly. I know what I'm asking you to accept. I know this crosses a line. But Blair, I've been where you are. I've had to make impossible choices. And I learned that sometimes the only way to be truly safe is to eliminate the threat at its source. And what happens to me? The question came out smaller than Blair intended. What happens to the woman who knows her ex was murdered and did nothing to stop it? You become the woman who survived him. Fully, completely survived. Zane moved to the door. I'll be back before dawn. Get some sleep. And Blair, you're not responsible for this. I am. I'm making this choice. You're just living with the consequences. He left, and Blair sat frozen in the massive bed, her mind racing. She should call someone. The police, maybe. Or who? She had no one. No family, no friends who weren't connected to her old life. Just Zane and his people and the strange, dangerous world she'd fallen into. She thought about Victor. About the way he'd smiled while hurting her. How he'd called it love while choking her. How he'd whispered that she'd never escape him right before slicing her throat. She thought about the 8 months of running, the terror every time a door opened, the way she'd learned to sleep lightly and always know where the exits were. And she thought about the woman she'd been before. Victor confident, hopeful, believing that the world was fundamentally good. That woman was gone. Victor had killed her as surely as if he'd finished what he started with that knife. Blair got up and went to the window, watching the estate's grounds in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere out there, Zane was doing something irreversible. Something that would change both of them forever. And she was letting him. By the time the sun rose, Blair had made her peace with it. She'd chosen Zane Sterling knowing exactly who he was. Chosen him because of that ruthless protection, not despite it. And if that made her complicit, if that made her someone who could accept murder as the price of safety, then she'd have to learn to live with that. Because the alternative, living in fear for the rest of her life, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for Victor to find her, was its own kind of death. and she died enough. Zane returned as the first light broke over the horizon. He found Blair in the kitchen, making coffee with hands that only shook a little. He stopped in the doorway, blood on his shirt, exhaustion in his eyes. "It's done," he said simply. Blair poured 2 cups of coffee, handed him one. "Is he? He won't hurt you again. That's all you need to know." She should ask for details, should demand to know exactly what happened, but Zane was right, some things were easier not knowing. So instead she said, "Thank you." Zane's expression cracked just slightly. "You're thanking me. You kept me safe. That's what you promised." Blair set down her coffee and moved to him, wrapping her arms around his waist despite the blood and the smell of violence that clung to him. "I know what that cost you. Not the action you'd do that again without hesitation, but letting me see this side of you, knowing I might hate you for it." "Do you?" His voice was rough. "Hate me?" "No." Blair pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I wish I did. I wish I was horrified and repulsed and running for the door, but I'm not. I'm relieved and grateful. And so tired of pretending that makes me a monster." "You're not the monster." Zane's hands came up to frame her face. "I am. You're just the woman who survived one. We're both survivors." Blair echoed his words from weeks ago. "And sometimes surviving means accepting help from people who do terrible things. I can live with that. Can you?" "I've lived with worse." He kissed her forehead, gentle despite everything. "Go back to bed. Sleep. I need to clean up and make sure there are no loose ends." Blair let him go, watching him disappear up the stairs. She should feel something more: horror, grief, guilt. But all she felt was the absence of fear. For the first time in 8 months, she could breathe without wondering if Victor was watching, could sleep without nightmares of his hands around her throat. Zane Sterling had killed for her, and she was choosing to stay anyway. That made her complicit. It made her someone she didn't fully recognize, but it also made her free. And freedom, Blair was learning, came with its own complicated morality. The official story was that Victor Hale had died in a warehouse fire accidental, likely related to his illegal activities. The police investigation was perfunctory, the detective assigned to the case one of Zane's contacts. No one dug too deep. Men like Victor disappeared all the time in this city. Blair read the news report 3 days later, sitting in her office while Zane handled calls in the adjacent room. "Local man dies in East Side warehouse fire." 2 paragraphs, buried on page 6. A life reduced to filler content. She should feel something. Relief, guilt, grief for the man Victor might have been before whatever broke him. But she felt only numbness, that same terrifying stillness that Zane wore so well. "Stop reading that." Zane appeared in her doorway, leaning against the frame. "It won't change anything." "I know." Blair closed the browser tab. "I just needed to see it, to make it real." "Is it real now?" "I don't know." She met his gaze. "How do you do this?" "Live with this every day?" "By remembering why I do it." Zane moved into the room, perching on the edge of her desk. "Every choice I make, every line I cross, there's a reason. And as long as the reason matters more than the cost, I can live with myself. And I'm reason enough? You're not the reason. You're the person I'm protecting." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's a difference. I didn't do this for you. I did it because Victor Hale was a threat that needed eliminating. You just happened to be the catalyst." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was the lie Blair needed to hear, the one that let her believe Zane's violence existed independent of her, that she wasn't responsible for another person's death. What she said next shattered his trust instantly. That afternoon, Torres knocked on Zane's office door. Blair was there for a briefing, and she tensed when she saw his expression carefully neutral, which meant bad news. "We have a problem," Torres said without preamble. "Victor had a partner we didn't know about, someone named Marcus Cole. He's been quiet, staying under the radar, but he just surfaced. And he knows Victor was looking for Blair." The numbness shattered. Blair's hands clenched on the arms of her chair. "Another one?" "Victor's cousin. They were close." Torres pulled up a photo on his tablet, a man in his early 40s, with Victor's same cold eyes. "He's been asking questions, careful questions, but questions nonetheless. He knows Victor's death wasn't accidental." Zane's expression went glacial. "Where is he?" "That's the problem. He disappeared 2 days ago. We're tracking him, but he's smart, knows how to stay hidden." Torres hesitated. "Sir, there's a chance he's coming here, that he knows Blair's location." "How?" Zane's voice was deadly quiet. "The PI Victor hired?" We paid him off, but he kept records. Digital records that Cole might have accessed before we scrubbed everything. Blair felt the room tilt. So this isn't over. He realized he wasn't alone, someone else had arrived. It will be. Zane stood, that terrifying stillness settling over him like armor. Torres, I want every entrance to this estate monitored. Full security protocol. And I want Cole found. Tonight. Already on it. Torres left, and Blair and Zane were alone. I'm sorry, Zane said quietly. I thought eliminating Victor would end this. You can't anticipate everything. Blair's voice was steadier than she felt. What do we do now? We wait, we prepare, and when Cole makes his move, and he will, we finish what Victor started. They didn't have to wait long. Marcus Cole came that night, 3 a.m, scaling the estate's wall with professional precision. He made it exactly 17 feet onto the property before Torres's team intercepted him. They brought him to Zane's study hands, zip-tied, bleeding from a cut above his eye, and threw him into a chair. Blair watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. Zane had told her to stay in her room, but she'd refused. If this was about her, she needed to see it. Marcus Cole. Zane circled the man slowly, his voice conversational. Victor's cousin, the one who taught him to hunt, to track, to hurt. Cole spat blood onto the hardwood floor. You killed him. I eliminated a threat. Zane stopped in front of him. Just like I'm about to eliminate you. Then do it. Cole's smile was twisted, but it won't change anything. Victor loved that girl. And love doesn't die just because he did. I'll finish what he started. If not me, someone else. She'll never be free. Blair stepped into the room before she could second-guess it. I'm already free. Cole's gaze swung to her, and she saw it the same obsessive gleam Victor had worn. The belief that she was something to be possessed, controlled, reclaimed. You think hiding behind him makes you safe? He's just another cage, sweetheart. Just prettier bars. The difference, Blair said quietly, moving to stand beside Zane, is that I chose this cage. I chose him. And I choose to watch what happens next. Zane glanced at her, a question in his eyes. Blair nodded, once, and saw understanding there. She wasn't going to look away, wasn't going to pretend this wasn't happening because of her. She was claiming responsibility, not guilt, but ownership of her choices and their consequences. Blair, Zane said carefully, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She met Cole's eyes. You think I'm a victim. You think I'm something to be saved or reclaimed. But I survived Victor. I survived 8 months of running, and I'll survive you trying to finish what he started. Because I'm not the same woman who ran. I'm the one who stopped running. And the man standing next to me? He doesn't need to ask permission to protect me. He just does it. Every time. Cole laughed, bitter and sharp. You're pathetic. A mafia whore playing at being strong. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. He didn't finish the sentence. Zane moved with brutal efficiency, his fist connecting with Cole's jaw hard enough to snap his head back. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll kill me like you killed Victor? Cole's words were slurred now, blood flowing freely. Do it. Make her watch. Let her see exactly what kind of monster she's fucking. She already knows. Zane's voice was utterly calm. And she's still here. What happened next was swift and final. Zane didn't drag it out, didn't make a show of it. He simply ended the threat with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything. Blair watched, forcing herself not to look away, and felt something fundamental settle inside her. She'd made her choice, not just to accept Zane's protection, but to accept what that protection required. The violence, the moral compromise, the blood on both their hands. When it was done, when Torres's team had removed Cole's body and cleaned the study, Zane turned to Blair. You shouldn't have seen that. Yes, I should have. Blair's voice was steady. Because this is the life I'm choosing. And I need to see all of it. Not just the parts you think I can handle. Zane studied her for a long moment. You're not horrified. I'm terrified, Blair admitted. But not of you. Of how normal this is starting to feel. Of how I can watch a man die and feel nothing but relief that he won't hurt me. That's not who I used to be. Maybe who you used to be wouldn't have survived. Zane closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her shoulders despite the blood still on them. Maybe this is who you had to become. And is that enough for you, this version of me? Blair, you're stronger than anyone I've ever met. You survived Victor. Survived 8 months alone. Survived me tearing apart your life and rebuilding it. You're not diminished by this. You're forged by it. His forehead touched hers. And yes, it's more than enough. It's everything. Blair kissed him then, tasting blood and desperation, and the terrifying certainty that they were bound together now by more than attraction. They were bound by choices made in darkness, by violence committed in her name, by the understanding that sometimes love looked nothing like the fairy tale. Sometimes love looked like a mafia boss going numb with protective fury. Sometimes love looked like a woman choosing safety over morality. And sometimes love meant accepting that the person who saved you was also the person who'd kill for you without hesitation. That night, wrapped in Zane's arms, Blair finally let go of the woman she'd been before Victor. That woman was gone, died the night a knife pressed to her throat. In her place was someone harder, someone who understood that survival required compromise, and that safety sometimes came with blood on its hands. She wasn't sure if that made her stronger or just more damaged, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was finally, truly free. Victor was gone, his cousin was gone, and the man holding her had promised she'd never have to run again. Blair chose to believe him. 6 months later, Blair stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows in Zane's their bedroom, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The estate felt different now, not a cage or a safe house, but a home. Her home. "You're thinking very loudly again," Zane said from behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. Blair leaned back against him, just reflecting. It's been half a year. Having regrets? Surprisingly, no. She turned in his arms to face him. "I keep waiting to feel guilty or horrified or like I've lost myself. But I don't. I feel whole. For the first time since Victor, I feel like a complete person." "You are a complete person." Zane's thumb traced her jaw. "You always were. You just needed time to heal. And a morally questionable mob boss to fall in love with." His smile was small but genuine. Morally questionable is generous. Blair laughed, the sound freer than she'd have thought possible 6 months ago. So much had changed. She'd taken over as Zane's chief operating officer for his legitimate businesses, a role that came with real power and responsibility. She'd trained until she could take down men twice her size. She'd built friendships with Torres and Dr. Chen and even Luca, who'd warmed to her after she'd won a debate about Machiavelli. She'd built a life, not the one she'd planned in college, not the conventional path she'd once imagined, but hers, chosen and fought for and earned through survival. "Torres finalized the last of the legal cleanup," Zane said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Victor and Cole's cases are officially closed. No loose ends, no threats. We're really free then. We're really free." He pulled back to study her face. "So what do you want to do with that freedom? Travel? Start a new project? Name it and it's yours." Blair considered. 6 months ago, she would have asked to leave, to start over somewhere Victor's ghost couldn't reach. But now, "I want to help others, women like me, the ones running from men like Victor with nowhere to go." Zane's expression shifted surprise, then understanding, then something that looked like pride. "You want to start a shelter. Not just a shelter, a network. Safe houses, legal support, job training, protection." Blair's mind was already racing with possibilities. Women shouldn't have to choose between staying with an abuser and sleeping on the street. They shouldn't have to work themselves to death just to afford medication. "I had you. Most of them have no one. That would require significant resources." "You have significant resources." Blair met his gaze steadily. "And I have experience in both surviving and rebuilding, plus connections to a certain morally questionable organization that's very good at making problems disappear." Zane's smile widened. "You want to use my network to run an underground railroad for abuse victims. Is that a problem?" "Not even slightly." He kissed her, slow and thorough. "I'll have Luca set up the legal framework. Torres can handle security, and you can build something that actually makes a difference. Though I should warn you, people will question why a mob boss is funding women's shelters." "Let them question." Blair's voice was fierce. "We know the truth, that sometimes the only people willing to really protect the vulnerable are the ones who understand violence intimately. That sometimes the system fails and you need someone who operates outside it. That sometimes justice requires getting your hands dirty." But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. "When did you become such a pragmatist?" "When I fell for a man who showed me that morality isn't black and white. It's every shade of gray in between." Blair traced the tattoos on his chest, the ones she'd learned to read. Each one a story, a choice, a line crossed. "You taught me that. I think you knew it already. You just needed permission to acknowledge it." They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their worst moments and built something unshakable from the ruins. Blair thought about the woman she'd been at the club, desperate, exhausted, trying to stay invisible. That woman had collapsed in front of a mafia boss and changed both their lives forever. Do you ever think about that night? She asked. The club? Every day. Zane's arms tightened around her. I think about catching you and feeling how fragile you were. Seeing that scar and going completely numb because I knew, absolutely knew, that I couldn't let you go back to whatever life had broken you that badly. It was the first time in 20 years that I'd felt something besides control. What did you feel? Terror. The admission was quiet. Terror that I'd lose you before I even knew you, and a possessiveness so strong it should have scared me. I looked at you and thought mine. Not in a rational way, just mine. Blair's breath caught. I felt it too, even unconscious. Some part of me knew I was safe, that you'd protect me. It was the first time in 8 months I'd stopped fighting. You haven't stopped fighting. Zane pulled back to meet her eyes. You've just chosen what to fight for instead of what to fight against. That's the difference. He was right. Blair wasn't the same woman who'd run from Victor, too traumatized to trust anyone. But she also wasn't the woman she'd been before, naive, believing that goodness always triumphed. She was someone new, forged in the terrifying stillness of that moment, when Zane Sterling had caught her and decided she was worth protecting. I love you, Blair said, the words simple but weighted with everything she couldn't articulate. I love you for seeing me at my worst and not flinching, for going numb instead of angry, for making me safe when safety felt impossible, and for letting me see all of you, even the parts you thought would scare me away. I love you, Zane replied, for being brave enough to stay, for arguing with me, challenging me, refusing to be saved like some passive damsel, for watching me do terrible things and still choosing me anyway. You make me better without trying to change me. I didn't know that was possible. They kissed, and it felt like a promise. Not the conventional kind, no white weddings or normal futures, but a promise that they'd keep choosing each other, keep building this strange, beautiful, morally complicated life together. Later, curled in bed, with Zane's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Blair thought about survival. About how sometimes the people who saved you were the dangerous ones. About how love could look like violence and protection could require blood. About how the strongest foundations were built on truth, even when that truth was uncomfortable. She'd collapsed in front of a Mafia boss, and he'd caught her. He'd seen what she was running from and eliminated the threat. She'd seen what he was capable of and stayed anyway. And together, they'd built something real from the terrifying stillness of their worst moments. A partnership forged in darkness, but burning bright enough to light the way for others. Blair Sutton was no longer running. She was home, and the man sleeping beside her, the one who'd gone numb with protective fury, and then shown her what absolute safety felt like, was the reason why. Some love stories started with flowers and first dates. Theirs started with a collapse and a catching. With numbness and scars and the understanding that sometimes survival meant accepting help from someone who operated outside conventional morality. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was permanent. And that, Blair decided, was more than enough. If you felt something while watching, please subscribe. That's how I know these stories mean something to you, even on your TV. Take a second to join our community of story lovers. Your support keeps this world of emotions alive.